The Tragedy and the Stranger. Selena stared at the ceiling of her small, dimly lit room. The soft hum of machines around her was the only sound in the house. For 5 long years, she had been trapped in her own body, unable to move, unable to feel anything below her shoulders. Her once bright green eyes now held a shadow of sadness, a heavy weight of hopelessness. The accident during the great solar storm had changed her life forever, leaving her paralyzed and broken. Her family did their best to care for her. Her younger brother, Saren, would sit by her bed and tell her stories of the world outside. Her mother would feed her and try to make her smile with old songs. But deep down, Selena knew they were tired, and she hated being a burden. She dreamed of running, dancing, and laughing like she used to. But dreams were cruel reminders of what she had lost. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting a warm orange glow over the village, a stranger arrived. The villagers, who rarely saw outsiders, gathered at the main square to see who it was. The stranger was a human, a species few in the village had ever seen up close. She wore a sleek, white suit and carried a small case. Her hair was tied back, and her sharp eyes scanned the curious crowd. "I am Dr. Emily Carter." The human introduced herself in a calm, confident voice. "I've come from Earth. I've heard about someone here who might need my help." The villagers whispered among themselves. Humans were known for their advanced technology, but they were also known to meddle in things that didn't concern them. The village elder, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. "What help do you offer, human?" he asked. "We've already consulted our best healers. The girl's condition is beyond cure." Emily didn't flinch. She opened her case, revealing a sleek, silver device. It gleamed under the fading sunlight, its surface smooth and flawless. "This is an exoskeleton," she explained. "It's designed to connect with the nervous system and restore movement. We've used it on Earth to help those who thought they'd never walk again." The villagers gasped, some in awe, others in suspicion. "Why would you help us?" Someone shouted from the crowd. "What do humans gain from this?" Emily sighed. She was used to these questions. "I'm not here for gain. I'm here because I can help, and I believe everyone deserves a second chance." Selena's family had heard the commotion outside and came to see what was happening. When Emily saw Selena, her expression softened. "You must be Selena," she said gently. "I can't promise miracles, but I can promise that we'll try." Selena's mother hesitated. She looked at her daughter, her heart torn. Could this strange human really help? What if something went wrong? But Selena's faint voice broke the silence. "Let her try," she whispered, her eyes meeting Emily's. "I have nothing to lose." The village elder wasn't convinced. "You're asking us to trust alien technology. What if it harms her further? What if this is some human experiment?" Emily held up her hands. "I understand your fear, but Selena deserves a choice. She's the one who will decide." The villagers murmured, debating among themselves. Finally, Selena's father stepped forward. "We will allow it," he said, his voice steady but cautious. "But if anything happens to my daughter, you will answer to us." Emily nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the villagers dispersed, Emily set up her equipment in Selena's room. She explained every step, her voice patient and kind. Selena listened carefully, a mix of hope and fear swirling in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. As Emily attached the first pieces of the exoskeleton to Selena's arms, a strange sensation spread through her body. A faint tingle, like a long-forgotten memory waking up. Selena gasped. What is that?" "It's the neural interface," Emily explained with a small smile. "It's connecting with your nervous system. This is just the beginning." For the first time in years, Selena felt a spark of hope. She looked at Emily, this stranger from another world, and thought, maybe, just maybe, I can live again. The tech that changes everything. Selana's small room buzzed with quiet energy. Emily Carter unpacked the exoskeleton carefully, piece by piece, placing it on a nearby table. Each component gleamed like it held a secret, and to Selana, it might as well have been magic. She lay on her hover bed, watching every movement Emily made with wide, curious eyes. For the first time in years, there was something in the air that felt unfamiliar. Not pity, not sorrow, hope. Emily turned to Selana, holding up a sleek silver cuff. "This," she said, "is going to be your new beginning. But I need you to trust me." The alien girl blinked. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Emily smiled gently. "Not in the way you think. The connection process will feel strange, like waking up parts of yourself that have been asleep, but I'll guide you every step of the way." Selana nodded slowly, her fingers twitching with the little movement she still had. "I want to try," she whispered. The first step was simple. Emily placed the neural interface cuff around Selana's wrist. It was light, almost weightless, but as soon as it clicked into place, Selana felt a faint tingle crawl up her arm. It wasn't painful, just unusual. Her breath hitched. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. "It's your nervous system waking up," Emily explained. "Your brain is sending signals it hasn't sent in years. It's like introducing old friends who forgot they knew each other." Selana's mother, standing in the corner of the room, watched silently. Her face was a mix of wonder and fear. "Is it safe?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. Emily nodded. "It's designed to adapt. Human technology has come a long way. We've learned to work with the body, not against it." The next part was harder. Emily attached the exoskeleton frame to Selana's arms and legs. Each piece clicked into place with a soft hum, its internal systems powering up as Emily adjusted the settings. The room was silent except for the faint whirring of the machine and Selana's shallow breaths. "Now comes the tricky part," Emily said. She crouched beside Selana, her eyes serious but warm. "You're going to try to move, just a little. Don't push too hard. The exoskeleton will do most of the work, but it needs your input to know what to do." Selana's heart raced. Her whole life had been stillness for so long that the idea of movement felt foreign. Her mind screamed with doubt. "What if I can't do it? What if this doesn't work?" Emily seemed to sense her hesitation. "It's okay to be scared," she said softly. "But courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about taking the first step anyway." Selana closed her eyes. She focused on her left hand, imagining it curling into a fist. Nothing happened at first. Her frustration bubbled up, threatening to drown her. But then, she felt it. A tiny twitch in her fingers. Her eyes flew open. I felt something," she cried, her voice trembling. Emily grinned. "Good. That's just the beginning." Over the next hour, Emily guided Selana through simple movements. A flick of a finger, a small bend of the elbow. Each motion was a victory, a tiny miracle that filled the room with unspoken joy. By the time the session ended, Selana was exhausted but smiling. A real, genuine smile that her family hadn't seen in years. But outside the room, not everyone was celebrating. The village elder watched from the shadows, his face grim. To him, this technology wasn't a blessing. It was a dangerous intrusion. He turned to another villager and whispered, "Humans never give without taking. We must be careful." The painful beginning. Selana had never imagined that hope could hurt. As she stared at the strange exoskeleton now attached to her body, it felt as though she was staring at a stranger's limbs. Her arms and legs, once lifeless and still, now gleamed with polished silver plating that hummed faintly with power. The hope she had felt earlier was now mixed with fear and frustration. Emily stood beside her, holding a small control panel, her face calm but focused. "Today's the day we push the limits," she said with quiet determination. "The exoskeleton is ready to work with your body. But you have to meet it halfway. Halfway. Silana muttered bitterly. I'm not even halfway to being alive again. Emily crouched to meet her gaze. You're more alive than you think. Trust me. But this won't be easy. Silana's mother, standing at the door, frowned. She's been through enough, she said. Why does it have to be painful? Emily looked at her, her voice steady. Because pain means progress. If we don't push, she'll never move forward. Turning back to Silana, Emily adjusted the settings on the exoskeleton. I want you to try lifting your right arm. Focus on it. Don't overthink. Just feel it. Silana took a deep breath. She stared at her arm, willing it to move. The exoskeleton began to hum louder, responding to her mental commands. Slowly, painfully, her arm began to rise. Every inch felt like dragging a boulder uphill. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she let out a gasp of frustration as the arm fell back to her side. I can't do this, she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. It's too hard. I'm too weak. Emily didn't flinch. It's not about strength, Silana. It's about persistence. Your body has been silent for years. It's going to take time to teach it to listen again. Silana's brother, Saren, peeked into the room, his young face filled with worry. Is she okay? He asked timidly. She's stronger than she knows, Emily replied without looking away from Silana. But strength isn't built in a day. Hours passed as Silana tried again and again. Each failure weighed heavily on her, but every small movement she achieved brought a flicker of hope. By the time the sun had set, she managed to lift her arm fully for the first time. It wasn't graceful or smooth, but it was real. I did it, Silana whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. I actually did it. Emily smiled, her own relief hidden behind a mask of professionalism. You did more than that. You proved to yourself that you can. But the victory was short-lived. That night, as Silana lay exhausted in her bed, doubts crept into her mind. What if this was as far as she could go? What if this small movement was the best she'd ever achieve? Her newfound hope felt fragile, like a flame in a storm. Meanwhile, in the village square, murmurs of discontent began to grow. Some villagers gathered around the elder, their voices low and filled with fear. This human is playing with things she doesn't understand, one said. What if her technology harms Silana more? The elder nodded gravely. We must watch her closely. If she fails, she will not stay here. A threat from within. The village square buzzed with tension as the crowd grew restless. The alien sky above shimmered with streaks of green and purple, the remnants of a distant solar storm casting eerie shadows on the ground. In the center of the gathering, the village elder stood tall, his staff tapping rhythmically against the cobblestones. His face was stern, his deep-set eyes filled with doubt. She is toying with forces beyond her understanding, he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the villagers. This human claims to help, but at what cost? We cannot ignore the risks. Behind the crowd, Silana's mother watched with unease. She had seen the small victories her daughter had achieved under Emily's care, but the whispers of the villagers were beginning to seep into her thoughts. Could they be right? Was this miracle too good to be true? Meanwhile, in Silana's room, Emily was pacing back and forth. The exoskeleton had begun to show signs of strain during their last session. A faint flicker in the neural interface, a glitch in the calibration. It was nothing major, but it was enough to worry her. She worked tirelessly, her tools spread out across the small table as she adjusted the delicate components. Silana watched her with a frown. Is something wrong? She asked, her voice tinged with fear. Emily hesitated before answering. The device is fine, for now. But it wasn't built for your planet's magnetic storms. I need to make some modifications to keep it stable, so it could stop working. Silana's heart sank at the thought. What happens if it fails? Emily looked her in the eyes. We're not going to let that happen, she said firmly. But I need time. Time, however, was a luxury they didn't have. Later that evening, a group of villagers arrived at Solana's house, led by the elder. They pushed their way inside, their faces hard with suspicion. "This experiment of yours must end," the elder declared, pointing a finger at Emily. "You're putting Solana's life at risk with your reckless technology." Emily stood her ground, her voice calm but sharp. "This isn't your decision to make. Solana chose to do this." The elder's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand our ways, human. We protect our own. If your device fails, it could harm her permanently. Or worse, it could harm others." Solana, still seated in her hover bed, clenched her fists. "I'm not a child," she said, her voice rising. "This is my life, my choice. If I'm willing to take the risk, why can't you let me try?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The elder turned to Solana's mother. "And you? Will you stand by and watch your daughter become a victim of human arrogance?" Solana's mother hesitated, her gaze darting between the elder and Emily. Finally, she spoke. "I've seen my daughter smile for the first time in years. I've seen her move. That's more than you or anyone else here has done for her. I trust her decision." Emily felt a surge of relief, but she knew this wasn't the end. The elder, his pride wounded, stormed out of the house, his followers trailing behind him. "If anything goes wrong," he said over his shoulder, "you will be held responsible." As the door slammed shut, Emily turned to Solana. "They're scared," she said softly. "Fear makes people act out." Solana's jaw tightened. "I don't care what they think. I'm not giving up." Emily smiled faintly. "Good, because we have work to do." Outside, the elder gathered his closest allies. "We'll keep watch," he said. "If the humans' technology shows any sign of danger, we will intervene." Unbeknownst to them, the exoskeleton's faint hum was already growing unstable, and the magnetic storms above were far from over. A glimpse of hope. The village square was eerily quiet. A crowd had gathered, their eyes fixed on the small path leading to Solana's home. Whispers rippled through the group like an undercurrent. "Will she really walk? The human is risking too much. It's unnatural." At the heart of it all, Solana stood inside her home, staring down at the exoskeleton. It felt heavier today, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Her family surrounded her, their faces a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Emily knelt beside her, double-checking the neural connections. "Are you ready?" Emily asked, her voice calm but firm. Solana swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she gripped the frame of her hover bed. "I think so." "No," Emily said, meeting her gaze. "You know so. Tell yourself that." Solana closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Her heart pounded as she focused on the feeling of her legs she hadn't moved in 5 years. The exoskeleton hummed softly, responding to her mental commands. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do this." The door opened, and Emily led Solana outside. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw her standing. Not perfectly, not steadily, but standing nonetheless. The elder, watching from the back, folded his arms. His face was unreadable, but his disapproval was evident. Solana's first step was awkward. Her left foot dragged slightly before the exoskeleton corrected its position. Her second step was smoother. With every move, the crowd leaned closer, their expressions shifting from doubt to wonder. "I can't believe it," Saren whispered, clutching his mother's hand. "She's really doing it." By the fifth step, Solana stopped, her breath ragged. Her entire body felt like it was on fire. Sweat dripped down her temples, but a smile broke across her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't confined to her bed. She wasn't helpless. She was alive. The crowd erupted in cheers, some clapping, others crying. Solana's mother rushed forward, embracing her daughter. "You did it," she cried, tears streaming down her face. But not everyone was celebrating. The elder stepped forward, his staff striking the ground sharply to silence the crowd. "This is not a miracle," he said, his voice cold. It's a dangerous illusion. The mood shifted instantly. The cheers quieted, and the villagers turned to him with confusion. She has walked today, yes, the elder continued. But at what cost? What happens when this human technology fails? What happens if it harms her further? Emily stepped in, her tone unwavering. What happens is that Silana is no longer trapped by fear. She's proven that she can move forward, and she'll keep moving forward, with or without your approval. The elder glared at her, but before he could respond, Silana spoke up. "This is my life," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I've waited years for this moment. If there's a risk, I'll face it. But I won't let fear control me anymore." Her words hung in the air, silencing even the elder. The crowd began to murmur again, this time with admiration for Silana's courage. Emily helped her back inside, where she collapsed onto her bed, every muscle aching. "That was incredible," Emily said, a proud smile on her face. "You've done more than anyone thought possible." Silana smiled weakly. "I've taken my first steps. Now I just have to keep going." But as Emily checked the exoskeleton, a faint flicker of warning lights caught her eye. The neural interface was stable, for now, but the magnetic storm brewing on the horizon was another matter entirely. She kept her concerns to herself, knowing Silana needed rest and not more fear. Outside, the elder spoke quietly to a group of villagers. "This human is blind to the dangers. We must prepare for the worst." Unbeknownst to everyone, the storm's energy was already causing subtle disruptions in the exoskeleton systems, and the hardest challenges were yet to come. A hidden danger. The air was thick with the promise of a storm. Above the village, green and violet streaks of magnetic energy rippled across the sky, a warning from the planet itself. Inside Silana's home, the hum of the exoskeleton faltered for a moment before resuming. Emily noticed the flicker, her stomach nodding. "Not now," she muttered under her breath, running diagnostics on her portable panel. The exoskeleton was struggling to adjust to the planet's shifting magnetic fields. Every warning light on her screen felt like a countdown. Silana sat nearby, her hands gripping the armrests of her hover bed. She could sense something was wrong. "Emily," she said cautiously, "is the exoskeleton okay?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's holding for now, but the storm outside isn't helping. I need to recalibrate the system before it causes problems." Silana frowned. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that could make it unsafe for you to use," Emily admitted, meeting her gaze. "But don't worry, I'll fix it." Outside, the village buzzed with unease. The elder stood with a group of his supporters, their eyes locked on the skies. "This storm isn't natural," he said, his voice low and foreboding. "The human's technology is disturbing the balance. If we don't act, it could bring disaster." A young villager hesitated before speaking. But Silana walked. "Isn't that proof it works?" The elder's expression hardened. "It's proof of how dangerous it is. She is playing with forces she doesn't understand, and we will all pay the price." Back in Silana's room, Emily worked furiously. Her tools clinked softly as she adjusted the neural interface and shielded the exoskeleton circuits from the storm's interference. "This should hold," she said after an hour, her voice laced with exhaustion. "But you'll need to be careful. No overexertion until the storm passes." Silana wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the window, where flashes of light illuminated the village. "I don't have time to wait," she said quietly. "I've already lost years." Emily looked at her, a mixture of admiration and frustration in her eyes. "If you push too hard, you could damage the connection permanently. Do you understand what that means?" Silana nodded but said nothing. Deep down, she knew Emily was right, but her desire to prove herself, to the villagers, to her family, to herself, was stronger than her fear of failure. Later that night, the storm reached its peak. The sky roared with thunderous energy, and the ground vibrated faintly beneath the village. In the middle of the chaos, Silana made her decision. She strapped on the exoskeleton, ignoring Emily's earlier warnings. Each piece clicked into place, the device humming softly as it powered up. Saren caught her in the act. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Emily said to wait. "I can't," Silana replied, her voice firm. "If I don't do this now, they'll never believe in me or in what this technology can do." As she stepped outside, the storm's light bathed her in an otherworldly glow. Villagers gathered again, murmuring in confusion and fear. The elder stepped forward, his face a mask of anger. "What is this madness?" he demanded. "You risked not only your life but ours." "I'm taking control of my life," Silana said, her voice steady despite the storm raging around her. "For the first time in years, I'm not afraid." With trembling determination, she took a step forward. The exoskeleton responded, but not smoothly. Sparks flickered along its joints, and a faint warning tone emitted from the device. Still, Silana pressed on. Each step was a battle, but she refused to stop. The elder turned to Emily, who had rushed out after her. "This is your doing," he accused. "She'll destroy herself, and us with her." Emily ignored him, her eyes locked on Silana. "Come back, Silana," she shouted. "The system isn't stable." But Silana didn't stop. She walked to the center of the square, her head held high. The storm crackled around her, and for a moment, it felt as though the world was holding its breath. She raised her arm, the exoskeleton sparking faintly, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is not just human technology," she said. "This is hope. Hope that we don't have to be defined by our limits. Hope that we can rise above fear." The villagers stood frozen, torn between awe and fear. Emily's heart raced as she watched Silana push herself beyond her limits. The exoskeleton's warnings grew louder, and Emily knew she had to act fast. "Silana, stop," she yelled, rushing toward her. But before she could reach her, the storm intensified, and the exoskeleton emitted a sharp, high-pitched tone. A spark flew from its mainframe, and Silana stumbled, her body faltering under the strain. The crowd gasped as Emily caught Silana just in time, lowering her gently to the ground. "Enough," Emily said firmly. "You've done enough." As the storm began to fade, the elder stepped closer, his face unreadable. "She is brave," he admitted, "but bravery alone will not save her, or us." Emily looked at him, her jaw set. "No, but it's a start. A new beginning." The village was silent as the storm passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of rain and ionized energy. The faint hum of the exoskeleton had stopped, and Silana lay on the ground, her breaths shallow and ragged. Emily knelt beside her, frantically scanning the neural interface for damage. The crowd stood frozen, their faces a mix of awe, fear, and uncertainty. "Silana," Emily whispered urgently, "can you hear me?" Silana's eyes fluttered open, her lips curving into a faint smile. I walked," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I really walked." Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Yes, you did, but you pushed too far." She glanced at the exoskeleton's damaged joints and fried circuits. "The system is fried. It's not going to work again without serious repairs." The elder stepped forward, his staff thudding against the damp ground. "And what now, human? Your technology has failed, just as I warned. What will you do when there's nothing left to fix?" Emily stood slowly, turning to face him. "You think failure is the end. It's not. Failure is where progress begins. Silana has proven that she's stronger than any of us imagined. And that strength doesn't come from this technology. It comes from her." The villagers murmured among themselves, their fear starting to melt into something new: admiration. Silana's mother pushed through the crowd, falling to her knees beside her daughter. "You're incredible," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you." Silana, with Emily's help, sat up. She looked at the crowd, her voice growing steadier with each word. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about all of us. We let fear keep us from trying, from hoping. But we don't have to live like that anymore. Emily didn't come here to fix me. She came here to remind us that we can fight for more." The elder's face softened, the weight of his doubts visible in his eyes. "You've shown courage, Silana," he said quietly, "perhaps more than any of us deserve." Emily crouched beside Silana, inspecting the damaged exoskeleton. "The neural interface has adapted," she said, half to herself. "Your body is starting to relearn movement on its own. With some time and training, you might not even need this tech to walk." Silana's eyes widened. "You mean I could do this on my own?" Emily nodded. The exoskeleton was always meant to be a bridge, not a crutch. "You've already done the hardest part, believing it's possible." The crowd began to shift, villagers stepping closer with cautious smiles. Saren ran forward, throwing his arms around his sister. "You're amazing, Silana," he cried. "I knew you could do it." As the villagers began to cheer, the elder raised his hand, silencing them. He looked at Emily, his expression still guarded but no longer hostile. "You've given us much to think about, human. Perhaps we were wrong to doubt you." Emily smiled faintly. "You don't have to trust me. Trust what you've seen." The elder nodded, then turned to the crowd. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. Fear is a prison we build for ourselves. Silana has shown us the key to freedom." Later, as the villagers returned to their homes, Silana sat with Emily under the now clear sky. The stars above sparkled brighter than she'd ever remembered. "Thank you," Silana said, her voice filled with emotion. "You didn't just give me back my movement. You gave me back my hope." Emily smiled, her gaze fixed on the stars. "You gave it to yourself, Silana. I just showed you the tools. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our belief that things can always get better." As Silana looked down at her trembling hands, no longer lifeless but alive with possibility, she felt a surge of determination. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, she was ready to move forward, step by step, one foot in front of the other. And this time, nothing could hold her back.